Hamas published another hostage video this week showing Omri Miran celebrating his second birthday in captivity. Intensive fighting was reported for the first time in Gaza since the collapse of the truce on March 18th, while the sides are also debating a new proposed deal for a 5-year ceasefire. Meanwhile, the World Food Program has announced that it has run out of food in the Gaza Strip, shutting down its facilities that were feeding nearly half of the population. Alongside this, despite Israeli government denials, there are also initial reports that the Israeli military is preparing an aid distribution center that it will be in charge of in the southern parts of Gaza. I'm Alon Burstein. Let's dive in. On Wednesday, April 23rd, Hamas published a hostage video showing Omri Miran. This is the second hostage video in which Miran has appeared. The previous one was published almost exactly a year ago, on April 27th, 2024. The new video begins with a camera following Miran through a dark tunnel before focusing in on him in an underground room. He states that he is recording this video on his 48th birthday and that this is his second birthday that he is marking in Hamas's captivity, and then he is seen lighting a candle and states that a cake was made for him in honor of his birthday. He mentions missing his daughters and his wife and thanks the protesters in Israel who are demanding a ceasefire and a hostage deal, asking that they also hold a big rally in front of Netanyahu's house and that they bring his daughters to this rally, stating that this way he hopes he can at least see them on television. He speaks about Keith Segal, who is the hostage that was shown with him in his previous video and who was released in the hostage deal since then, and asks Segal and other released hostages to shout out about how terrible conditions are in captivity and about the daily fear of IDF bombings. He states that the supporters of Netanyahu do not care about the hostages and would happily see them die, and asks that the people also appeal to U.S. President Trump as the only one who can possibly push for a deal. He also states that he's been told that the crossings for humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip have been closed, and that is the reason that the hostages are receiving less food. Unlike the previous Hamas hostage videos that all ended with fade-outs that stated that only a deal will bring the hostages home, this video ends with Miran seen against bars in a tunnel, chastising Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, and Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir, stating that they are at fault for the October 7th attack and are responsible for him being in captivity. I will say that during the video, Miran used the exact text that Hamas usually has in the fade-out at the end, stating that military pressure will kill the hostages, that they will only be brought home through a hostage deal. However, again, this is the first Hamas video in a long time that does not end with that fade-out. With regards to where things stand in the hostage negotiations, after Hamas rejected the latest proposal for a smaller phase deal, several days ago, Egypt and Qatar put forward a new proposal. According to reports, this new proposal focuses on a long-term 5 to 7 year ceasefire that will be declared between the sides, alongside an idea of withdrawal from the Gaza Strip and an end to the war. In turn, Hamas will surrender its governing powers in the Gaza Strip, and all remaining hostages will be released in exchange for an undetermined amount of Palestinian prisoners. In a moment of analysis, I'll say that it appears that this proposal is attempting to balance the demands and the red lines of both sides. Hamas has said that it will demand that any deal has a complete ceasefire and end to the war, and Israel has demanded that all the hostages be released, and also that Hamas no longer is in power in the Gaza Strip. However, I will also say that importantly, the issue of Hamas's disarming, which is another thing that Israel has added as a demand in any declaration of an end to the war, is seemingly not addressed in this new proposal, or at least what has been leaked from this proposal. Regarding the responses of the sides, in Israel there was no official comment made about this new proposal. I will say that Al Arabi Al Jadid reported on Friday that an Israeli delegation will travel to Cairo on Sunday in order to discuss this new framework. However, this has not been reported in any Israeli news outlet, nor has the government made any comments. In turn, it was reported on Saturday that the head of the Israeli Mossad, Dadi Barnea, is going to travel to Qatar in the coming days in order to probe where things stand on the negotiations. I will say that this is an interesting move since Barnea is no longer officially part of the negotiating team. Him and the head of the Israeli Shabak, Ronen Bar, were part of all the previous negotiations. However, both of them have been sidelined in the last month, with Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, who is one of Netanyahu's closest confidants, being put in charge of the negotiations. Barnea himself, the head of the Mossad, is known to have good relations with the Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed Athani. Therefore, and this is speculation on my part, it is possible that his visit is more unofficial probing into the deal, Israel saying it's not officially sending a delegation to the negotiations about this deal, but sending Dedi Barnea in order to unofficially discuss with Qatar and see where things lie. On Hamas's side, a delegation reportedly traveled to Cairo over the weekend, and on April 26th, AFP quoted Hamas sources as stating that the movement is willing to move forward with a proposal of a 5-year ceasefire, the release of all hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, and an end to the war. The source added, however, that disarming is not on the table as far as Hamas is concerned, and I will say also that these reports were later confirmed by Hamas's head of international relations, Ali Barakeh, who stated in the El Miadin interview later in the day that Hamas is willing to move forward with this deal, and that the movement is also interested in a single-phase deal and not in the staged deals that have been until now, the release of a few hostages and Palestinian prisoners, and this way prolonging a temporary truce, but rather a single-phase deal. In terms of where things stand right now, I will say that Israel will likely be handed Hamas's answer through the negotiating countries either tomorrow or in the coming days, and then it will have a few days in order to draft a response. If the sides agree to move forward with the negotiations about this deal, we may see a summit conference in the next week or so, either in Qatar or in Egypt, but likely in Qatar, as were the last summits. Or we may also see lower-level negotiation teams starting to discuss what might be achieved within the framework of this deal. As a broad reminder with regards to the hostages, there are still 59 hostages in the Gaza Strip, 35 of whom have been confirmed dead by Israel, and their bodies are held in captivity. Of the 24 who remain, Israel has received life signs from 21 of them, so 24 are believed to be alive. 21 are more confirmed that they are still alive. I'll also remind, however, that on April 19th, the Al-Qassam Brigades announced that the site in which Idan Alexander, the last hostage that has U.S. citizenship, that site where he was held was bombed by the IDF and that his fate is unknown. At this point, it's unsubstantiated exactly if he survived or how many hostages remain alive at this point. Turning to the fighting in the Gaza Strip, after 5 weeks where there were little to no active battles in Gaza, ever since the collapse of the ceasefire has been mostly airstrikes and IDF ground activity, but very little active combat, over the past week there was intensive fighting that was reported between Hamas operatives and IDF forces throughout the various different parts of Gaza. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, an IDF unit was attacked with RPGs on April 25th, and an intensive gun battle also broke out after that. Several IDF soldiers were injured in those attacks, and major airstrikes were reported in the area after those attacks as the IDF forces were rescued. All that happened in the Tel Sultan region of Rafah over here. In the following day, on April 26th, an IDF vehicle reportedly crossed over a minefield that had been planted by Hamas also in the areas of Rafah, resulting in detonations and 4 more IDF soldiers being injured. The bulk of the fighting, however, was reported in the last several days in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. On April 24th, both the IDF and the Al-Qassam Brigades reported major gun battles in the eastern parts of Gaza City in Beit Hanun, that is this area up here, right near the buffer zone where the IDF is continuously expanding the buffer that it is holding between Israel and the Gaza Strip. On April 25th, Hamas operatives reportedly staged an ambush for IDF soldiers in the Beit Hanun areas as well, leading to intensive battles breaking out in the Saja'iyah regions, all in the eastern parts of Gaza City. Again, that is all in this area over here. The Israeli military reportedly responded with major airstrikes and artillery fire in that region, reporting at least 40 bombings. The following day, on April 26th, a series of incidents were also reported in Saja'iyah, including another ambush of the Al-Qassam Brigades that was staged for IDF soldiers. This included both RPGs and gunfire. According to reports, the rescue team of the IDF was then attacked by a continued ambush in the region, leading to a 4-hour rescue and over 5 different battle incidents throughout that entire region. In all those different incidents, 3 IDF soldiers were killed, and at least 4 more were reportedly injured. In addition to these, major airstrikes were also reported in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip throughout the last several days. These include substantial bombings that were reported in the areas of Jabalia refugee camp, Beit Hanun, and Sheikh Zayed. There were also bombings that were reported in Saja'iyah and the Zaytun regions of Gaza City. In addition to these, the IDF also issued evacuation orders to Palestinians in several regions in the central parts of the Gaza Strip, stating that they are soon going to be attacked as well. These include the areas of El Tarkman and El Jadida. These are these areas in the central parts of the Gaza Strip that were all ordered to evacuate westward towards the humanitarian El Mawasi zone. The Palestinian Health Ministry reported that over 105 Palestinians were killed throughout Friday and Saturday in the different parts of the Gaza Strip. I remind everyone that the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip reports on the total amount of Palestinians that have been killed in the Strip and does not distinguish between militants and civilians. The Israeli military, in turn, has not reported how many Palestinian civilians or militants it estimates were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last several days. In addition to the fighting, another major development of the past days has been on the humanitarian front in the Gaza Strip. As a reminder, no humanitarian aid has entered into the Gaza Strip since the end of Phase 1 of the truce on March 2nd, leading to increasing reports of hunger conditions spreading throughout Gaza. On April 25th, the situation took a drastic turn for the worse, as the World Food Program, which is now the largest agency distributing food in Gaza since the diminishing role of UNRWA, announced that its food storage supplies in the Gaza Strip have officially run out. The organization stated that it was delivering hot meals every day to some 900,000 Palestinians, that is nearly half the population in the Gaza Strip, adding that often this was the only meal that those people received throughout the day. In its report, the World Food Program added that there's a critical shortage of clean drinking water in Gaza, and that the lack of cooking gas is forcing people to burn material for cooking, which can often be highly toxic. It also added details from a study that was done in the previous week, showing that out of the children admitted to Gaza hospitals, some 4% are suffering from severe malnutrition, and that this is up from 2.5% in February. The agency added that throughout April, 60% of its locations that were dealing with malnutrition and treating the patients in the Gaza Strip were closed and had to relocate due to IDF evacuation orders and military activity. The World Food Program stated that in its estimate, this is the most dire humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip since the war began, and added that it has 116,000 tons of food, an amount that could feed 1 million people in the Gaza Strip for 4 months, ready to enter the Strip if the crossings were open. Prior to this development, over the past weeks, several different bodies, including the Israeli military, have estimated that the food storages in Gaza will not last more than another several weeks, leading to intense debates within the Israeli government about what to do in this situation. Several cabinet members have stated that they will overthrow the government if Israel allows aid to flow into Gaza again, stating that the aid each time only ends up in the hands of Hamas, and the government reportedly tasked the Israeli military with finding a mechanism that will allow aid to enter into the Gaza Strip without falling into Hamas's hands. Now, I mentioned these previous reports in Israel since hours after the World Food Program statements, U.S. President Trump was asked about this situation, and he stated on April 25th that in his conversations with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu earlier in the week, the subject of Gaza came up, and that he told Netanyahu that people are suffering and that Netanyahu should, quote, be good to Gaza, end quote. In a separate statement issued later in the day, Trump said that he's pressuring Netanyahu to allow more food and medicines into the Gaza Strip. Amidst this pressure from the United States, on the following day, on the evening of April 26th, it was reported in Israel that the IDF has begun developing a massive new humanitarian area in the southern town of Rafah. As a reminder, Rafah is now largely evacuated, and the IDF has completed the Murad corridor. That is a corridor the IDF has developed going in a straight line from here all the way to the sea, severing Rafah from the rest of the Gaza Strip. According to these initial reports, the IDF is preparing a vast area that will be designated a distribution site of humanitarian aid, and Palestinians will be able to cross through IDF checkpoints, presumably along that Murad corridor, in order to receive humanitarian aid that will be distributed by international agencies, likely U.S. companies. The aim, according to the different reports, is to avoid the bulk entry of humanitarian aid that then required logistical distribution by Palestinians in Gaza. It would inevitably then end up in Hamas's hands, since Hamas was the only functioning government that could handle such distribution. In this case, the idea is to distribute aid packages on a weekly basis directly to Palestinian families. Alongside this interest, Israel is also trying desperately to avoid having the IDF distribute the aid directly, seemingly out of a desire to avoid the logistics of this, but also out of a desire to not enter into the complexities that this would cause with international humanitarian law. That is speculation on my part, but seemingly the IDF is quite desperate to try to avoid that, and thus it is trying to develop this mechanism that the area will be under IDF protection, but who will actually distribute the aid will be private U.S. companies. According to Israeli sources, this area is being prepared very quickly due to the pressure from the White House, and should be operational within 2 to 3 weeks. Again, I'll state this is a very initial report from April 26th. However, I dedicate this much space to it since if the IDF does establish a major stationary site for aid distribution in Gaza, this is going to indicate a major shift in the trajectory of how the IDF is operating in the Gaza Strip, and will likely lead to also a shift in the trajectory of the war, and certainly the humanitarian situation and how it is treated in Gaza. Obviously, that remains to be seen, however, that is the report as of now. Those are my highlights on the recent developments in the Israel-Hamas war. If you find these highlights informative, please do remember to hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications when reports come out, send them on to anyone who you think might be interested in the war. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.